Hello. Welcome back to I'm Overy It. Do you ever find yourself feeling a little nostalgic on those quiet, sleepless nights when the world is still and your mind starts to wander? Memories seem to drift in like old songs on the radio. Well, lately I've been thinking a lot about those moments in life when everything just feels electric. The kind of moments that happen when you're young, curious, and open to whatever the world might throw your way. Traveling, saying yes to things without overthinking them, and meeting strangers who somehow end up being part of your story. For me, one of those places was the tiny island of Barbados. Sitting on the eastern edge of the Caribbean, Barbados is an independent nation with the British Commonwealth, an island where turquoise water meets coral sand beaches, and life seems to move at the easy rhythm of the sea breeze. It's the kind of place where the days slip effortlessly into the nights, filled with music, laughter, and the feeling that anything good could happen. It's funny how the mind works like that, carrying us back to those places and times that once felt so vivid, as if we're walking through them again for just a moment. My love affair with the island started about 25 years ago. I was 28 and working in the hospitality industry, bartending here in Kingston at a place called Brandy's. One of our porters, or also known as a beerback, that I worked with, had moved to Barbados. His mom was from Kingston. He lived most of his life here, and his dad was Bayesian. We kept in touch after he left via MSN Messenger. It was before Facebook, Instagram, and smartphones. Yeah, back then it was either email or Yahoo MSN. Each fall, after the chaos of busy summer season, the owner of Brandy's, Chris, had a pretty amazing way of saying thank you to me. He'd give me money for a plane ticket to take a trip somewhere. What a great bonus. Andrew said, "You should come here," talking about Barbados. It didn't take much convincing. I figured, why not? So I booked a 2-week solo adventure. Before I knew it, I was on the plane, headed south, chasing sunshine and whatever adventure might be waiting for me on the island. Andrew picked me up at the airport and took me to his apartment in Blackrock, St. Michael's Parish. Right away, I could feel the amazing energy of Barbados, warm, welcoming, and vibrant. We went to these beautiful seaside restaurants where the warm ocean breeze caught your hair. The air smelled like salt water, botanical flowers, and fried fish cakes. One night, we ended up at a Halloween party at Harbor Lights, this incredible open-air beach bar. Music was pumping, early 2000s dance hall, like Sean Paul, Shaggy, and Beanie Man. The moon was full, spilling itself across the ocean. That silver trail stretching right up to the shore. People in costumes all dancing barefoot in the sand. And that's where I fell in love with Mount Gay and Old Gold rum. It tasted like candy. A night to remember. Andrew worked at a local pool and trained with the Barbados swim team. So during the days, I was on my own. And honestly, that was half the magic. I spent my days exploring Black Rock, long walks along the shore, slipping into the sea for a swim whenever the heat called for it, and wandering through the little shops scattered around the neighborhood. There was no real schedule, just the easy rhythm of island life. Mornings became my favorite time. I'd sit out on the balcony of the apartment with a coffee in one hand and a cigarette in the other, watching the day slowly come to life. One of the neighbors across the way would always spot me and shout the biggest, happiest greeting, "Morning!" like we'd known each other for years. And in the background, the roosters would start crowing, loud and proud, as if they were joining in on the greeting. It felt like the whole island was waking up together, calling out a big hello to the day. It was paradise. I'd wander down to Brighton Beach armed with nothing more than my camera. This was long before smartphones, and a towel slung over my shoulder. The walk itself was always part of the experience. People passing by would beep their horns and wave hello. The kind of easy friendliness that seemed to exist everywhere on the island. One day, as I was heading down, a bus pulled up beside me at a stop. A young guy leaned out the window and called, "You going to bathe?" Meaning the beach. "Yes, I am," I laughed back. He grinned and shouted, "Want some company?" I waved and replied, "No, thank you, I'm good." And the bus whirred off. I kept walking, smiling to myself. When I reached the beach, I was always a little awestruck. The water was that unbelievable aquamarine blue, so clear you could see straight to the bottom, as if the sea were made of glass. Gentle waves rolled in and out, sparkling in the sun. I'd settle into my little spot in the sand, wandering in and out of the water, throughout the afternoon, then stretching out on my towel to soak up that sun-kissed bronze glow. One morning, as I was relaxing there on the beach, a man approached carrying his baby boy, maybe 10 months old, a year at the most, still not quite walking yet. He politely asked if I would mind watching the baby for a few minutes while he made a call at a nearby payphone. I remember being taken aback at first. Why would you trust a complete stranger with your baby? But as I glanced around, I realized that I was the only white person on that stretch of beach. I figured if I tried to run off with the little guy, I probably wouldn't go unnoticed. So I agreed. The father was gone for about 15 minutes. In the meantime, the baby and I became fast friends. I carried him down to the shallow edge of the water where we gently bobbed in the warm sea, the tiny waves lapping around our legs. He didn't seem the least bit bothered to be with a stranger. We just watched the water roll in and out, the sun glinting across the surface. It was one of those unexpectedly sweet moments that travel sometimes brings. Soon enough, his dad returned, thanked me warmly, scooped up his son, and they went on their way. And I carried on with my beach routine. Another swim, then back to my towel to dry in the sun. I'd brought along a small notebook with me on the trip and spent time scribbling down little observations and moments from my days. I wish I still had that notebook now. I have no idea where it ended up, but it would probably be filled with memories just like that one. One of the mornings, Andrew dropped me off in Bridgetown on his way to work so I could find a snorkeling cruise. I found this lovely little cafe called the Bean and Bagel, overlooking the harbor. It was only about 7 in the morning, so before the tourist rush. I sat on the balcony alone with a coffee and a bagel, watching the charter fishing boats prepare for the day, spraying down the decks, filling their ice boxes, and loading up with supplies. And I also had a great view of the town, watching the bustle of the locals heading about their day. It was one of those quiet travel moments where you just sit there, taking it all in, and think, how euphoric is this? Those simple, unhurried moments that had a kind of magic to them. The kind you don't realize is so special until you pause long enough to feel it. The restaurant manager came over to say hello, and we started chatting. Within a few minutes, we realized we were both hospitality lifers. I'd been working in restaurants since I was 16, and so had he. It didn't take long before it felt like we were two old friends catching up after years apart. I couldn't help but noticing his striking green eyes. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dreads and this calm, easy presence about him. Later, I learned his dad was Irish and his mom Bayesian, which gave him that rich, beautiful coloring and those unforgettable eyes. He actually reminded me a bit of Gary Dourdan, who played Warwick on CSI, Crime Scene Investigation. At one point during our conversation, I mentioned I was hoping to find a snorkeling boat cruise for the day. He smiled and said, "Let me see what I can do," and he disappeared down towards the docks. About 20 minutes later, he came back with a big grin. "Captain Eddie has space on his boat and will be happy to have you." Perfect. Danny walked me down to meet the captain, the owner of the boat. We shook hands, and he pointed me towards a small office beside the dock where I could pay before we set off. Then I stepped aboard this beautiful 40-foot red and white catamaran, its wide pontoon stretching out on either side like wings over the water. At the bow was a huge black net, perfect for stretching out, feeling the spray of the sea beneath you, riding the gentle rise and fall. A few moments later, the lines were untied, the engines hummed to life, and just like that, off we went across the sparkling waters of Barbados. We stopped at these incredible snorkeling spots where I swam with sea turtles and the most vibrant tropical fish you've ever seen. At one point, the crew tossed some bait near me, which I didn't know at the time. And suddenly, it felt like 1,000 fish surrounding me. For a second, I panicked. Then it became the most surreal, magic moment, just floating in the middle of this swirling blanket of color. One of our stops was in Carlisle Bay, home to several shipwrecks scattered across the sandy bottom. The wrecks ranging from old steamers to sunken tugboats that rest at depth, some lying just 3 to 10 feet below the surface. Over time, they've become thriving artificial reefs, covered in coral and surrounded by schools of colorful fish darting in and out of the metal frames. I slipped into the water and swam down towards one of the wrecks where we were floating nearby. Running the length of it underwater felt surreal. The outline of the old ship stretched quietly along the seabed, its edges softened by years beneath the sea. It was haunting and breathtaking all at once, eerie and beautiful at the same time. like a forgotten piece of history resting peacefully under the waves. We anchored in a calm patch of water for lunch. A buffet lunch was thoughtfully laid out with fresh salad, grilled flying fish, tender chicken, rice and peas, and this sweet golden cornbread that might honestly be the best I've ever tasted. It was incredible, home cooked and prepared by Eddie's sister. By then, my hair was stiff with salt and my eyes stung a little from the sea, but that wonderful way that comes from spending hours in the water. They offered a glass of wine that was ice cold, the kind that slips down too easily, tasted like another 2 or 3. The ocean was so warm and unbelievably buoyant, saltier than anywhere I'd swum before. Florida, Cuba, nothing compared. I jumped in for a swim to cool off after lunch while still anchored. Most of the guests were still nibbling on their lunch. As I floated beside the boat, I could see into the galley below where Captain Eddie was washing dishes during a break. He spotted me and waved me down. I climbed back aboard, thinking maybe he needed help with the dishes. Wink, wink. He greeted me with the biggest smile, pulled me into a hug, and kissed me. And then, yes, I actually did help finish the dishes. He was a beautiful man, handsome, with the kindest energy about him, and the biggest smile. The kind that seemed to light up his whole face. There was an easy warmth to him that instantly made you feel comfortable, like you were exactly where you were meant to be. The whole crew carried that same relaxed island spirit. Everyone was welcoming, laughing, moving around the boat with a kind of effortless rhythm. One of my favorites was Eddie's nephew, Orlando. We ended up giggling a lot, sharing those little moments of laughter that seem to happen naturally when you're surrounded by good people. En route back to port, the rum punches started flowing and the music got louder. Before long, the whole deck had come alive, people dancing, laughing, the sun blazing overhead while the sea sparkled in every direction. I was completely mesmerized watching the crew dance, the way they moved their hips, the effortless grinding in rhythm. It was pure island energy. They made it look so natural, like the music lived right in their bones. I couldn't take my eyes off them, hypnotic about it, confident, playful, and impossible not to watch. Back to land. As we walked off the boat, Danny from the cafe was just finishing his shift nearby, so we stood chatting while I told him all about my day out on the water, still buzzing from the sun, salt, and rum punches. I had that wonderful sea legs feeling, the kind where the ground still seems to gently sway beneath you after a full day on the water. As the crew finished up, he stopped to chat with Danny and I and invited us to join them at the boatyard for a drink. Of course, they all knew each other. It is a tiny island after all. In Barbados, it felt like everyone was somehow connected. As Eddie liked to say, Barbados is 21 miles long and 14 miles wide, just a smile wide. The boatyard was a few feet from a lovely beach called Brown's Beach. I took full advantage and wandered in and out of the water, rinsing off each time in the outdoor showers. The warm breeze carried the smell of salt and sunshine, the kind that sticks to your skin long after you leave the beach. The ocean sparkled in that endless shade of blue and seemed to slow to the rhythm of the waves. And I remember thinking, what is this place? I was completely, hopelessly falling in love with Barbados. Just after dusk, Eddie drove me back to Andrew's apartment, where Andrew was waiting outside, a little worried because I was a little bit later than expected. I didn't have a cell phone back then, so no way to check in. But once he met Eddie and heard about the day, everything was good. I was definitely sun-kissed and tipsy, but absolutely floating on air. And that was just day 3 of the trip. Over the next few days, Andrew was busy preparing to move into a condo near the Rockley Golf and Country Club. I tagged along, helping him pack things up, run errands, and pick up a few odds and ends that he needed for the move. When we finally got the keys and moved in, the place was completely empty. No furniture yet, just a single mattress on the floor. But the view made up for it. The condo overlooked the lush green fairways of the golf course. It was peaceful and quiet. Not long after, Andrew had to head off to Trinidad with the swim team, leaving me to fend for myself in the big empty space. It was a beautiful condo, no doubt, but it wasn't exactly within walking distance of the beach's restaurants, which made the days feel a little stranded. So I did what any resourceful traveler might do. I called Eddie and asked if I could join them the next day for another cruise. Of course, meet us on the dock at 8:30 a.m. One of the taxi drivers I ended up using a few times was a character named Crazy. I never did learn how he got his nickname, but it suited him perfectly. He was probably in his late 60s, full of stories and quick laughs, and driving around with him always turned into a little adventure. The next morning, he picked me up. There were a few kids in the back seat that he was driving to school. They were absolutely adorable, all dressed in their crisp blue and white uniforms, chatting and giggling. At one point, I felt the gentlest little tug on my hair. One of the boys had leaned forward from the back seat and was quietly touching the ends of my wild blonde hair as it blew around in the warm breeze coming through the open windows. He looked completely fascinated, like it was the most curious thing he'd ever seen. It was such an innocent, sweet moment. After we dropped the kids off at school, I asked Crazy to stop at a little gas station so I could grab some water and cigarettes. I know, a bad habit. As I hopped out, I asked if he wanted anything, thinking he may say a coffee or a sweet treat, because it was really early in the morning. Without missing a beat, he said, "I'll have a Heineken, please." I burst out laughing. You got it. I came back with his cold Heineken, handed it over. He cracked it open and took a big gulp. And we carried on to Bridgetown Harbor, where he dropped me off at the boat. Just another perfectly random little moment that somehow made the whole trip feel even more memorable. This time when I went on the cruise, there was a very discounted fee, and I was incredibly grateful. And once again, the day out on the water turned into another spectacular cruise. Sun shining, sea sparkling, laughter, and music drifting across the deck. At the end of the day, Eddie drove me back to the condo. He came inside while I showed him around. After one look at the empty rooms and the lonely mattress on the floor, and hearing that Andrew wouldn't be back anytime soon, he shook his head and said, "Pack up your things. You're coming to stay with me." And just like that, I did. For the rest of my trip, I stayed at Eddie's place, which happened to be only about a 10-minute walk from Rockley Beach. The area had such an easy, relaxed rhythm to it. Little shops tucked between casual restaurants and laid-back rum shacks where music drifted out into the warm evening air. It didn't take long before it started to feel like my own little neighborhood. That's where I met Paul, who ran one of the rum shacks right on the beach. He was one of those people who seemed to know everyone and had a story for everything. His mom would bring food for purchase, and let me tell you, her macaroni pie and fish cutters were next level. Absolute heaven. I can still taste them now. Honestly, it couldn't have worked out more perfectly. Days melted into golden afternoons, with soft sand slipping between my toes and the Caribbean sun warming my shoulders. The sea sparkled just steps away. I met some incredible people during that time. Danny would pop by for a drink now and then, and the three of us, Paul, Danny, and I, would end up laughing for hours. Being in the hospitality industry, we all had endless stories to share, the kind that only people who've worked in bars and restaurants truly understand. We were also almost the same age, which made it even easier. Before long, it felt like we'd known each other forever, like long-lost brothers from another mother. And the icing on the coconut? I went with Eddie to work for the next 4 days. Not exactly part of the official crew, but close enough. He'd introduced me as part of the crew before debarking. I floated somewhere between guest and deckhand, enjoying the best of both worlds. I helped serve drinks, swam alongside the guests in that impossibly blue Caribbean water, lent a hand as people climbed in and out of the sea, packed away snorkel gear after each stop, and wash glasses. Of course, I happily partook in the libations flowing throughout the day as well. At one point, a couple from Calgary asked me how long I'd been living in Barbados. I laughed and told them, about 8 days, and I'm also on vacation. Somehow, I had blended right in. Each day would wind down at the boatyard, where we'd take a few of the guests. More swimming, more drinks, more laughter as the sun started to sink lower in the sky. Afterwards, we'd head back to Eddie's place, rinse the salt and sun off for the day, and settle in for dinner. Sometimes he cooked up something, and sometimes leftovers from the generous lunch spreads we served aboard the boat. Later in the evening, we'd wander over to the St. Lawrence Gap, known simply as the Gap, a whole strip buzzed with life. Bars, restaurants glowing under the warm lights, music drifting through the open air, tourists and locals mixed easily, moving from one place to the next. Eddie introduced me to something truly special. in the little fishing town of Oistins, the legendary Oistins fish fry. As evening settled in, fishermen brought in the day's catch, and the entire place came alive. The air filled with mouth-watering smell of flying fish, tuna, and shrimp, sizzling on open grills. Smoke and spice drifted through the market while reggae and soca pulsed from speakers nearby. Long communal tables filled up quickly as locals and visitors sat shoulder to shoulder, plates piled high with fresh seafood and Bajan sides. It was loud, vibrant, and full of energy, a celebration of food, music, and community. My favorite was this little booze vendor where we'd grab a bowl of ice, plastic cups, and a small bottle of rum and Coke so we could mix our own drinks. Standing in the warm night air, music thumping, salty breeze rolling through the crowd, it was one of those moments where you think, this is definitely where I'm meant to be. And then there was the day Danny offered to drive me around the entire island. No real plan, just the open road and the promise of beaches along the way. Windows down, warm wind rushing through the car, we stopped again and again for quick swims in different coves and stretches of sand. At one point, we pulled into Sandy Lane, the famously posh resort where the rich and famous vacation, for a drink and a snack. It was a fun little contrast to our carefree beach-hopping day. Later, we made our way to Bathsheba Beach on the north coast, where the Atlantic crashed in with real power. Surfers dotted the water, riding the rolling swells, while waves smashed dramatically against the rugged rock formations. It was the wild side of Barbados, the roughest coastline on the island. Beautiful to watch, but definitely not the place for a casual swim. By the end of the day, we ended up on the west coast, just in time to watch the sunset. He took me to a beachside patio where we ordered drinks and settled in to watch the sky turn soft shades of gold, pink, and orange. Every so often, I'd wander down to the water, slipping into the warm ocean before returning to my seat, salty and smiling. The sea went glassy as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was one of those simple, perfect days that you wish you could bottle up. My contribution to the adventure? I bought the beer for the road and filled up his gas tank. That was a fair trade, if you ask me. Epic. Barbados kept pulling me back after that. Over the years, there were several more visits, each one bringing back that same feeling the moment I'd stepped off the plane in Barbados for that first time. One trip was a quick 3-day stop before heading on to Trinidad for Carnival with a girlfriend who was from Trinidad. Of course, we stayed at Eddie's, and by then, it almost felt like a second home. At one point, he had quite the international house going. There was a girl from Luxembourg and another from the UK also staying there. They had both come for a holiday, fallen in love with the island, and decided to stay. Barbados seemed to have that effect on people. There was another solo escape after that, and a couple more girls' trips over the years. One time I even returned on a cruise ship and happened to be in port for New Year's Eve. Paul and his wife came aboard the ship to join me for dinner, music, and celebration. We rang in the new year together, and it felt pretty special. One of the most unexpected was with the boat manufacturer. Barbados was hosting a drug commanders conference, bringing together DEA agents and officials from across the Caribbean and South America. Among the presenters were Steve Murphy and Javier Pena, the very agents whose pursuit of Pablo Escobar inspired the series Narcos. Hearing their stories firsthand was incredible. Because of the nature of the conference, we had armed guards with us everywhere we went. It made sense. Cartels would have loved the opportunity to target the very agents who had been responsible for disrupting their shipments. It definitely added a layer of intensity to the trip, but it also made it one of the most fascinating work experiences I've ever had. And every time I returned to the island, I made sure to see familiar faces that had become part of my Barbados story: Eddie, Paul, and Danny. Well, before Danny eventually moved to the UK. Each visit meant catching up over a drink, sharing a few laughs, and swapping stories about where life had taken us since the last time we'd sat together in the warm island air. It always felt a little like coming home. Thank you for listening. I don't want every episode to feel like a rant, because it's not just about what's changing. It's about what we do with it. Those memories, the ones that still live in your bones, they matter. But so does figuring out how to create new ones in this stage of life. Maybe the things we used to do don't always fit anymore, and that's okay. This episode is for Courtney and Tanya, two of my listeners who tell me they just love the sound of my voice and who, like me, have felt the magic of Barbados. We're not chasing who we were. We're recreating and celebrating who we are now. Until we meet again.